Okay, good morning, people. Happy Friday. We've made it to the end of the week, to the end of week 11. So we've only got less than 2 weeks left because not this Monday, but next Monday is a holiday. So there's 9 classes left, believe it or not. So we're really close to the end. Obviously, the weekend's coming up pretty soon, and looks like the weather's getting a little better out there. I think Saturday and Sunday are supposed to be nice. So if you're here in Vancouver, maybe you can get out and get a bit of sun, but stay safe. Don't go too close to people. Yeah, so let me say good morning to you. So Thika's here. Hello, Thika. Good evening to you again. Good morning again, Jenna. Good morning, Carmen. Min is here. Good morning, Min. Good morning, KC again. Aliana's here. Good morning. Siobhan's here. Good morning to you. Cindy's here. Morning, Cindy. Adalbert's here. Morning, Adalbert. Ying is here and Rashid is here. Hello to both of you. Hello again, Jimmy. Hello again, Karen. And good morning, Pearly. So what we'll do today is we will try to wrap up Greece. We're going to move on to Rome, and Rome will probably be the last thing that we deal with in this course. I think that's kind of all the time that we'll have. I wanted to do a little section on the Americas, but we're gonna run out of time. This term was actually a week shorter than normal because we started a bit later, so it's only kind of 12 weeks rather than 13. We made our classes longer to compensate, so it's the same number of hours, but we lost a week there. So maybe next time I teach this class we'll be able to get to that last unit, but this time it looks like it won't happen. Okay, but without further ado, let's jump in, okay? So if you remember from Wednesday, we were talking about the end of the Peloponnesian War, and the Peloponnesian War, of course, was where Athens decided they were going to start a war with Sparta, and if they were able to defeat Sparta, it would make them basically the only power in the Mediterranean, not the Mediterranean, but the Aegean. And so the whole of the Aegean would belong to Athens, and Athens would gain glory and power and riches. So they engage in a war with the Spartans that goes on for about 25 years or so. There are victories, there are defeats. There's Athens winds up with contracting the plague in the middle of the war. And toward the end of the war, there is a bit of a turning point where the Athenians decide to sail to Sicily to help out one of their allies and hopefully humiliate the Spartans. It's a foolish and ridiculous plan. There's no strategic benefit to them going to Sicily to assist these allies. And when they get there, it's confusion and disagreement, and basically the Athenians are slaughtered at Sicily. Basically no one returns, none of the ships return, and it's a disastrous defeat. Sometime after, the Spartans enter in a bit of an alliance with the Persians. They use some Persian ships in order to quarantine, if you will, Athens. So Athens can't get any food imported in. And basically Athens is starving and they're forced to surrender. Once they do, the Spartans tear down the walls around Athens. They burn all of Athens' fleet, so their triremes are all burnt. And of course, the Spartans take control of Athens until they are thrown out a couple of years later. But as a result of the end of the Peloponnesian War, we said that the kind of character of Athens changes a bit. They still remain a democracy, like I said, but they enter into kind of a new phase of development. And so they become a city that's much more focused on the arts and on intellectual pursuits. Prior to the Peloponnesian War, they are a city that's kind of interested in power and glory and warfare. And so um, their defeat by the Spartans really changes a lot of things for Athens. Um, yeah, so we watched um, we watched a little more of that documentary, the truth about democracy in Athens, and we said that well, we heard a couple things. One of the things we heard was that um, classical Greece, classical Athens is famous for its realistic sculptures, particularly the ones in bronze. And so artist Nigel Constam explained to us that they're probably the result of live casting. And so they were actually molding human people. And that's how, in part, that's how the sculptures were so kind of realistic. And those are important as well because that art form, that sort of classical sculpture art form that comes out of this period, it will be imitated by the Romans a few hundred years later, and it will be imitated by Renaissance artists in the 1500s. And so if you've heard of, Michelangelo, if you've heard of Michelangelo and other sort of Renaissance artists, they are heavily inspired by ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And so the sculptures we see the Greeks doing here will inspire Roman artists and will inspire later Renaissance artists, and still, of course, inspire artists today. We met Socrates, right? And excuse me. And Socrates is a philosopher, a thinker in ancient Athens, in classical Athens. He's kind of an interesting person in that he seems to have been a slightly difficult person to deal with. He seems to have been reasonably unattractive as a physical person. He seems not to have liked to really wash or wear nice clothes or wear shoes. And so he was kind of a dirty, grubby, unappealing guy, but an intelligent guy, and was constantly asking questions and asking people to examine their own beliefs and their own values, which is the core of critical thinking, right? This is rational inquiry, right? The idea that you can ask questions and use logic to determine answers, right? And so that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to get people to examine their beliefs and see whether they were worth believing, which is exactly what we said critical thinking was at the beginning, or close to the beginning of this course. We said that we want to examine our beliefs to make sure that they are true and correct and valid. And that's the exact thing that Socrates was saying to people. The things that you believe, make sure that you have good reasons to believe them. We also talked a little bit about Athenian drama, right? And we said that the most popular form of plays were tragedies. And again, the Greeks seem to really like these plays that dealt with really dark subjects, right? Lots of death and murder and plotting and revenge and adultery and incest and all kinds of horrible, awful things, right? And again, there seems to be a theme running through many of these plays that talk about how the Greeks wanted to, I think, communicate an understanding that sometimes it doesn't matter what you do, right? It doesn't matter how hard you try. It doesn't matter how great you think you are. You can lose it all, right? And so there's an element of hubris there, right? We talked about the idea of hubris. People who thought they were better than everyone else and better than the gods would inevitably wind up being punished. But there's also, there's this tragic element, right? And that's kind of what tragedy is coming to a realization that it doesn't matter what you do, something bad has happened and you can't change it, right? That's what what tragic is. And so the Greeks seem to get something out of watching these plays. One of the things I was going to mention is that if you think back to a little earlier in this course, we watched that TED Talk on the power of story with Jonathan Gottschall. And one of the things that Jonathan said is, he said that stories are very powerful and important for humans in terms of understanding their world. But he also said that when humans are engaged in story, they are feeling the same emotions as the characters, right? So when you're watching a movie or when you're reading a book that you're really into and enjoying, when something, sad happens to one of the characters, if you check what people's brains are doing, their brain is not activating in a way that, oh, they're watching someone be sad. It activates in a way that they actually are sad, right? So it's very interesting to imagine these Greeks seeing these plays that have such extremes of emotion, right? Such extremes of love and hate and despair, and them sitting in the theater watching these plays and feeling these emotions at the same time, right? And maybe that was kind of therapeutic for them, right? Maybe it allowed them to feel and experience and deal with these emotions that were difficult to deal with in real life. Hello, Ella and Sam and Michael. Hello to all of you. Drama, Greek drama and Greek tragedy become very important to the Greek world. There's in many Greek city-states, not just Athens, there are remains of theaters. So the theater was an important part of ancient Greek culture. And of course, lots of those plays have come down to us today. And so many of those plays are still performed in front of audiences even today, 2,500 years later, which is remarkable. Okay, let's talk just a little bit about philosophy, okay? So, philosophy, if you've ever taken a course in it, or you might in university, comes from the Greek word philosophia, the love of wisdom. And so philosophers like to ask questions about, well, about everything. Philosophers want to know, philosophers are constantly searching for truth. And so they use rationalism, they use logic, they use argument, they use discussion in order to try to find the truth of things, right? And so in some ways this is connected to science. Certainly in ancient Greece, philosophy and science are very closely connected because these ideas are still appearing and developing. Today, science and philosophy are somewhat interconnected in certain ways, which we probably don't have time to go into. But philosophy is about finding truth, right? And about examining beliefs, examining our values, examining why we do things, and trying to defend them rationally and logically, right? And so, trying to defend them rationally and logically. So these are some of the questions that philosophy has historically been interested in. And so philosophers have and continue to ask, is it possible to know anything and to prove it? How do you know what you know? Is it because people told you? Is it because you experienced it directly? And if you experienced it directly, the only way you could experience it is through your five senses. But how can you be sure your senses are correct? How can you be sure that your experience is the same as everyone else's? What things are most real? Is there a best way to live? And how do we know? How do we know that the best way to live is in fact the best? How do we measure it? Is it better to be just or unjust, even if you can get away with being unjust? This is a common one here. Do humans have free will? Are you in charge of your own life? Are you in charge of your own decisions? Or are we biological robots that are programmed to do things? That's still a topic of debate. So in classical Athens here, there's kind of three people we should know. Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. And they all kind of follow each other kind of generationally, if you will. Socrates, of course, we've already heard about. He comes first. He's kind of the founder of Western philosophy. He teaches Plato, who comes after him. But Socrates never wrote anything down. So Socrates kind of wandered around Athens, asking people difficult questions and arguing with them over things, but he never wrote anything down. And so we kind of know him. We know him through the writings of Plato, who was his student, and through Xenophon as well. And so some of the things that Socrates said, which I think are interesting to think about, he said, the only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. How about this one? Employ your time in improving yourself by other men's writings, so that you shall gain easily what others have labored hard for. This is a very interesting quote, because this is exactly what we're trying to do here in school, right? We're trying to take what others have learned and learn it, right? We're trying to use it. We're not trying to discover all these things for ourselves. We're trying to improve ourselves and our knowledge by learning what other people have discovered in the past, right? It's exactly what we're doing. This is kind of a funny one. By all means, get married. By all means, marry. If you get a good wife, you'll become happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher. I guess he had a sense of humor, Socrates did. I won't say anything else about that one. So his student is Plato, and Plato we know a bit better because Plato wrote things down. And so he wrote a number of books, which we'll hear about very shortly. He founds the academy in Athens. And so basically this is the first university. Might be a stretch to call the academy a university, but all universities that come after are kind of in the tradition of Plato's academy. And so, obviously the word academic comes from academy. And so this is kind of the beginning of higher learning in the Western sense, created by Plato in ancient Athens. And so again, we have lots and lots of writing from Plato. We know a lot of the things that he was thinking about and things that he believed. And of course, we also know a lot about his teacher, Socrates, because Plato wrote pretty significantly about Socrates in his books. Here's some Plato quotes that are kind of interesting to think about. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that's useful. The second one's kind of funny, but I think it's true as well. Wise men talk because they have something to say. Fools talk because they have to say something. What about this one? Apply yourself both now and in the next life. Without effort, you cannot be prosperous. Though the land be good, you cannot have an abundant crop without cultivation. Yeah, so he says that you cannot achieve things without hard work, right? You have to work hard to improve yourself. Okay, and the last philosopher that we'll learn about here is Aristotle. And Aristotle is a student of Plato's, right? As you can see, he joins the academy here as a young man. Um, and you can see that the things that he wrote about were very wide ranging, right? Of course, nowadays all of these are separate disciplines, right? Zoology, physics, biology, metaphysics, logic, ethics, aesthetics, poetry, theater, music, rhetoric, linguistics, politics, government. All of these are very different disciplines today. But at the time, um, people didn't really know as much as we do today. And so all of these sort of early disciplines were kind of just under the umbrella of philosophy and knowledge. But yeah, Aristotle writes pretty significantly as well. We know a lot about Aristotle, and maybe quite famously, he leaves Greece after the death of Plato and spends some time tutoring Alexander the Great, and Alexander will have pretty significant consequences for the Greek world. Yeah, so here's a few quotes from Aristotle. He says, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit." That's kind of interesting, right? So if you want to be really good at something, then make sure that you do it well. You can't be excellent at something just on your own. You actually have to practice excellence, right? It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. So that's a critical thinking piece as well. Can we think about ideas before we have decided whether or not we believe them? And here, "I count him braver who overcomes his desires than him who conquers his enemies. For victory is the hardest. Victory over the self is the hardest victory is over the self." Yeah. So mastering yourself is more difficult than sort of dominating or being successful of others. Okay. So a couple things for you here. I have two videos for you to watch. One is on why Socrates hated democracy. It's only about 5 minutes long. And the second one is about Plato. Okay? So two videos about 5 minutes long each. And so what I would like you to do is watch both the videos, answer the questions, typing them out so that we can talk about them in the live chat. Watch both the videos, take a break, and then come back here, okay? So, actually, no. No, let's not do that. So we'll watch both the videos, and then we'll come back here right after, and we'll talk about the answers to them, okay? So I'm going to give you 13 minutes to watch these two videos and to answer the questions. 14. I'm going to give you 14 minutes, and then we'll come back and do that, okay? So I'm posting the links and the questions in the student port in Microsoft Teams. So I just did that. I'll give you 14 minutes to go and watch the videos and answer the questions, and then come back here in 14 and we'll discuss them, okay? So I'll see you just shortly after the videos. Okay, people, and we're back. Sorry, I missed. Maybe I didn't give you enough time to do both videos, and I think I had the wrong link for the second video in there, so I apologize, but I did fix it. So hopefully you were able to watch both. But let's talk about our friend Socrates. So Socrates disapproved of democracy, says the video. Why did he disapprove of democracy? Why didn't he like democracy so much? So Cindy says, yeah, because democracy is based on voting, right? That's how decisions are made. And Socrates says that to be able to vote in an election or to vote on a question is a skill. It's not something that you should be just allowed to do because you were born in Athens, right? He says that you should have to educate yourself first. Voting is not a random intuition. Voting is a skill. Choosing the right thing to do and voting for it, that requires education, right? Casey says, because he thinks that voting is a skill, not a random intuition, it should be taught to people, because letting people vote without education is irresponsible. Yeah. Karen says, an incompetent person could be voted in and destroy society. Does that sound familiar? It's true, right? So yeah, so Socrates is questioning the means by which people are given the ability to vote. And of course, in most democratic countries today, we allow people to vote in a very similar way to what he's talking about. So as a Canadian citizen, if you are a citizen, if you're born in Canada, then you're allowed to vote. I'm allowed to vote. Now, am I educated enough to responsibly vote? That might be a matter of opinion. I hope so. But I have never been, instructed in how to vote beyond my own education. So Socrates makes a pretty important connection here between the political world, the world of voting and deciding on things, and the education world, right? How you educate your children and your citizens. So you're in a democracy, your democracy, your government, your country can really only be as good as its education system, because the education system produces the people who will then vote and decide on things. And if your education system is lacking, then your decision making and your government will suffer as well. So kind of ironically, a little bit ironically here, what happens to Socrates in 399 BC? What happens in 399 BC to poor old Socrates? So the video says he was put on trial on trumped up charges of corrupting the youth of Athens. Yeah, so what happens here is that after the end of the Peloponnesian War, after the Athenians lose, they are really upset and they're kind of looking for someone to blame. And they find Socrates, the guy who's been asking them to examine their beliefs all the way. People feel that the reason that everything went disastrously wrong for them was because of guys like Socrates running around causing people to question democracy, right? And ironically, he was trying to prevent them from making a mistake, and he didn't agree with going to war with Sparta in the first place. But even though Socrates didn't agree with the idea to go to war with Sparta, even though he was trying to get Athenians to think about their choices and do the right thing, ironically, he winds up being blamed for the whole thing. And so he's put on trial and he has to defend himself. And so they vote the Athenian trial has 2 votes, and so he gets to plead his case. He gets to say why he's innocent, and then the jurors vote whether or not he's guilty. So they vote whether to convict him or not. And then he gets to, based on that verdict, he can speak to the jurors again, and then they decide on how to punish him. And so interestingly, at Socrates' trial, he says that he's innocent and that he didn't do anything. He's just trying to get people to think about things. The jurors vote. They vote that he's guilty. And then he gets to address them again. And he basically tells the jury that they should be thanking him, that he should be treated as a hero for, trying to educate, a bunch of bozos in Athens. And so obviously that doesn't go over very well. And so interestingly, more people vote to give Socrates the death sentence than actually voted him guilty in the first place. So some people who voted not guilty actually changed their mind and wanted to execute him after his second speech. So he didn't really make any friends in this trial. But yeah, he gets executed as a result of these ideas, right? Yeah. So what does he say? How does he say that that we could remedy this problem with democracy? So Cindy says, insists that only those who had thought about the issues rationally and deeply should be allowed to vote. Right. And again, that's something in Canada that we don't do, right? When we have an election, let's say when we have a federal election to elect our federal government, nobody really checks to make sure that you've done your research. Nobody really checks to make sure that you have understood all of the issues and thought through them carefully and made a logical decision. We just get to go and vote. And so yeah, we're not following what Socrates wanted to happen. People are given the vote in Canada simply because you're born here or because you get Canadian citizenship, and then you can just go and vote, and you don't have to think about anything at all. You can vote in a federal election and just pick the candidate that you think is the nicest or the best looking or whatever. And so one of the problems I think that Socrates says is that this can lead to, or this can allow, the rise of demagogues. And so it's kind of a funny word, but what's a demagogue? That's, they probably talk about that there, Cindy, but that's not quite what it is. Not quite what it is. What's a demagogue? This is actually an important thing, I think. This is a good word to know. Cam and help you out. So this is what a demagogue is. Giving votes without connecting it to wisdom. Not quite. Here's what a demagogue is. So a demagogue is a political leader who seeks support, so he gets political support by appealing to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people rather than using a rational argument. Right, so I think I forget if it's in that video or if it's in the other video. He talks about the doctor or the owner of the sweet shop, right? And so are you the kind of political leader that just tells the people what they want to hear because you know that if you tell them what they want to hear, they'll support you? Or do you try to tell them the truth? Do you try and do the best thing for the country even though people might not like you for it? Right? What kind of leader are you? And so demagogues are the first kind. Demagogues use the people's prejudices and use the people's likes and dislike in order to gain power. So again, does that remind you of anyone in particular? Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of him, right? I'm kind of thinking of him because does he appeal to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people, right? Does he blame China or immigrants or the fact that everyone's taking advantage of America or people are, erasing their history or whatever it is? Yeah, he has a little bit of demagoguery in him. I think he's not a perfect example of a demagogue because I think a demagogue kind of knows what the people want to hear and specifically tells them that. Trump does that sometimes, but I think he also tells people what he wants to hear. And in some cases, that's in alignment with what the people want to hear. So I think Trump is more of an occasional demagogue or kind of an accidental one. But there certainly are leaders who are very keenly aware of what the public thinks and what the public likes and doesn't like, and basically just tells them what they want to hear. And because if you tell people what they want to hear, they will support you and you will get power. But again, that doesn't mean that what the people want is necessarily the best thing for everyone. Everyone wants lower taxes, but if we lower taxes, that means we're going to have less money for social programs, for roads, for infrastructure, for defense. And so, yeah, none of us want to pay taxes, but it's probably a good idea for us all to do it, even though we don't like it. And so, but demagogues don't care about that as much. Demagogues just want to tell people what they want to hear in order to gain power. Okay, I'm gonna jump to the next one here. So the next video was on Plato, and Plato was talking about eudaimonia, and he said eudaimonia it's a Greek word for fulfillment, right? And so Plato is talking about how can people be fulfilled? How can they get the things that they need? How can we create a society where people do get the things that they need? And so he comes up with four. Well, he comes up with a lot of ideas, not just four. You don't get to be the founder of Western philosophy and only come up with four things. You need more. But the video only talks about four things, right? And so Cindy says, think more, right? So Plato says that oftentimes we let our emotions run wild, right? We let our emotions drive what we want and what we do and what we say. But Plato says that people often don't think carefully and critically about what they believe and what they should do. And so Plato's very much in favor of us carving away time to really think about who we are and what we want and what our values are. And so that way we can make better decisions rather than letting our emotions dictate where we go, right, and what we do. Cindy says, yeah, he has a message about letting your lover change you. So he says, Plato says love is not about finding the perfect person and then being the perfect person and then, you're happily ever after perfect for the rest of your lives. He says love is a process of change, right? Where we help the other person become the best version of themselves. And in the process, the person who we're in a relationship with, they help us become the best version of ourselves as well. Interesting. Plato also says that we should decode the message of beauty, right? So things that are beautiful, whether they're music or whether they're art or buildings, all of those things are beautiful because they tell us something that we need to know. There's some sort of hidden message in the artwork that we need to learn, right? And so Plato says we need to be able to uncover that message. We need to be able to decode the message from artwork. And then finally, he says reform society. And so he says that just like the Spartan society was designed to create soldiers, Athenian society should be organized in order to create happy, fulfilled people. And so the question is, how do you do that? How do you create a society where people gain fulfillment, where they gain happiness, where they get what they need? And so those are some of the things that Plato was exploring in his writings. Okay, I think it's time for a bit of a break because we've been working really hard. We've been working really hard for an hour now. I'd like you to do one thing for me though. What I would like you to do, I'm going to put this in Microsoft Teams here. I would like you to take a 10-minute break, and then after that break, I would like you to come up with the most important things that we have learned about Greece in these categories. So this is the same thing that we did for India and for China. What are the most important things that we need to remember about Greece in terms of culture and environment, in terms of politics and power and authority and governance, in terms of interactions and exchanges, in terms of conflict and conflict resolution, values and beliefs, and cultural expressions, okay? So I posted all these in Microsoft Teams so that you have them there. And so maybe what we'll do is we'll take a 10-minute break, and then I'll give you about 10 minutes or so after that to come up with a few of those most important ideas, and then we can discuss those when we get back, okay? So I'm going to put some time on the clock here, go have a break, then when you come back from your 10-minute break, go to Microsoft Teams and see if you can come up with the most important things we should remember about Greece, okay? So I'll see you in just a little bit. Okay, people, and we're back. So, we were just talking a little bit about some of the ideas that these ancient Greek philosophers had, right? We said that Socrates was asking questions about the nature of reality and how do we know what we know, and um, how should we evaluate our beliefs, how should we examine our lives. And in doing that, we were talking a little bit about criticism of democracy, right? Because in my opinion, democracy is still the best political system that we have invented. However, it does have its faults, it does have its drawbacks, and Socrates points out one of these, right? He says that if people don't really know what they're voting for, if they're not informed on the issues, then they're going to make bad decisions, right? And so Socrates suggests that the political system and the education system are connected, and you can really only have as good of a democracy as you have an education system, right? And then we went on to hear a little bit about his student Plato, right? And Plato had four big ideas were summarized in that video of ideas of Plato. And four ideas which dog, cut it out. Those four ideas were that you should think more, that you should let your lover change you in a relationship, that you should decode the meaning of beauty, and that you should reform society in a way that allows all people to be fulfilled, right? Okay. Last thing, as this dog continues to bark, what things should we remember about ancient Greece to do with culture and environment? So Cindy says here, the mountainous nature of the mainland allowed different regions to remain somewhat isolated and promoted regional cultures. Yeah, that's true. So we started out talking about Greece, and it was not a flat area. Greek civilization didn't appear in a river valley like many of our other ancient civilizations did. It occurred in a bunch of sort of city-states that were scattered throughout Greece, most of them beside the sea, but not all of them. And the fact that it was so mountainous and rocky meant that each individual city-state could become a unique place to live, but it also kept the Greek city-states, for the most part, from falling under the control of one entity. And so, it was kind of a decentralized society. Greece was. So we said that because of that mountainous nature, it kept people from invading, but it also kept one Greek city-state from really controlling the entire area. And so again, every Greek city-state was unique, and living in Sparta, of course, was very different from living in Athens or Thebes or Corinth or Argos. Culture and environment. I guess maybe the only other thing we should mention, of course, is that the Greek world of the past was a little bit different than Greece today, right? And so we said the Greek world of the past was scattered around the Aegean, so it was Greece itself, but it was also the western coast of what's now Turkey. It was called Asia Minor at the time. And so that was the Greek world of the past, which is a little different from the modern Greek world. What did we hear about in terms of power and authority and governance? Quite a bit, actually. Sorry, Karen's got more. Sorry, I'll go back to you here, Karen. Karen says near the sea. That's right. So the sea plays an important part in Greek life, both in terms of fishing, which they did a lot of fishing, but also in terms of trading, right? So there are lots of Greek vessels sailing around the Mediterranean. Oh, look at all these things now. Greek vessels sailing around the Mediterranean, trading with other peoples. So the sea is an important thing for the Greeks to gain sustenance from, to fish from, but also to connect them to the rest of the world, which it did. We learned that the land around Athens is infertile, so it was difficult to grow crops around Athens, and so Athens traded for much of the grain that it needed. Very mountainous. Yep. The Persian Empire was found immediately to the east of the Greeks. The word you're looking for there is polytheistic. Polyamorous means that you have many lovers, which actually applies to Zeus anyway, because Zeus was polyamorous. But I think the word you're looking for is polytheistic. So politics and power and authority and governance. KC says democracy came into existence in Athens when they overthrew their ruler, right? When they overthrew the tyrant, and Cleisthenes created a democracy for Athens, right? A direct democracy where the people voted on basically all issues directly. Most modern states, really all modern states today, have a representative democracy. So we elect people to participate in the government and vote for us, right? So we don't vote on every single issue. We elect people and they vote on every single issue. But in classical Athens, it was direct democracy. So the people voted on every issue themselves. Cindy says, there were three types of political organization in Greece. That's true. So some city-states still had monarchs, single rulers, or tyrants. Some city-states like Sparta operated with an oligarchy, so a small group of people were running the city-state. And then places like Athens had democracy, right? Let's see. KC says here that Athenian men were in charge of the family and did military training, right? So that the military training was an important part of being a citizen of Athens, right? In order to vote, you had to have completed your military service. But also in terms of authority within the family, men were the authority in society and the authority within the home as well. Pearlie says Greece was ruled by kings and then ruled by small groups of powerful people. And it also, Pearlie, it depended on when and where you were talking about. And so, again, some places in the Greek world had single rulers. They had kings or tyrants. Sometimes you had small groups. Sometimes you had democracy. Sometimes things evolved over time, right? So Athens started out with kind of an oligarchy because the aristocrats were ruling Athens. And then they wound up with single leaders. They wound up with tyrants. They had a good tyrant and a few bad tyrants. Then they overthrew the tyrants and created a democracy. Then when Sparta defeated Athens in the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans installed an oligarchy. And then the Athenians overthrew the oligarchy and reinstated their democracy. Of course, later on, Alexander the Great would conquer Greece, and so Athens would be under a monarchy again, sort of. So these things did change over time, but there were a few different political systems in operation. What about interactions and exchanges? What did we see there? Interactions and exchanges. So either within the Greek world or interactions between the Greek world and other cultures or civilizations. Right, so we said the Athenians were heavily involved in trade, right? And that was a necessary thing for them because again, they needed wheat, they needed grain to eat, but they didn't really have ready access to it. They couldn't really grow it themselves, so they had to trade with other places, right? So we said very early on that the Athenians had created sailing ships to sail around the Aegean, and in the time period that we're in, they're already trading with Palestine, with Africa, with Italy, and with the Black Sea area. So there's lots and lots of trade going on very early on. So this is 2,500 years ago. And again, globalization is starting, right? Because these civilizations and city-states are connected with other cultures, are trading with them, and they're being influenced by them as well. Karen says they traded with the Persians, which I think they probably did. I don't know if we talked about that. They traded with the Persians. The Greek world did send out colonies, so there were Greek colonies all throughout the Aegean. During the sort of Delian League period, many of those city-states gave tribute, so they sent money to Athens. We said there were a number of conflicts, right? We said that the Persians attacked the Greek world twice, right? And so the first time the Spartans and then the Athenians are able to defeat the Greeks in sort of a very unexpected way. And then a little bit later on, the Persians come back, right? And again, the Athenians are able to defeat them with their fleet of triremes. Of course, we have a very large Peloponnesian War that happens between Athens and Sparta, which Athens will lose. But then about 50 years later or so, or 60 years later, all of Greece will be conquered by Alexander the Great. Okay. What about values and beliefs? What do we learn about Greek values and Greek beliefs? Okay, so Jimmy says here that the ancient Greeks worshipped 12 main gods, right? So we said Zeus was kind of he was the father figure of the gods. He was kind of the head of them. But we've also got Hera and Athena and Apollo and Demeter and Aphrodite, Hermes, Poseidon, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Dionysus, Aphrodite. We heard about Demeter. Demeter's in there, and her daughter Persephone, and Hades, who's not in there. We heard about lots of different gods. They're polytheistic, right? The Greeks are a polytheistic society with lots of different gods. We said that this was the idea of hubris, right? That people don't be tempted to think you're better than the gods, because again, if you do, you will be punished for it, right? So people were the gods played an important role in people's lives. They did sacrifice to the gods. They did ask the gods for assistance in their lives. But again, you had to show due respect, because the gods would punish you if you didn't show that appropriate respect, right? We said, I don't know if this belongs here or not, but I don't know where it belongs, so I think we should say it, Jimmy. We should say that Greeks did believe that women were lesser than men, and that's probably true throughout the Greek world in this period. But the way that the kind of rights and freedoms that women had varied depending on which city-state you went to, right? So in Athens, women seem to have had lesser freedom. They needed sort of male escorts when they left the house. They sort of covered their heads so that they wouldn't be seen in public, sort of thing. But if you went to Sparta, you'd see that the Spartan women were much more independent. they were educated, they were athletes, they would tell you what they thought, whether you liked it or not. And so I think throughout the Greek world, Jimmy, you would have seen that men had more power than women, but what that inequality looked like really depended on the city-state you belonged to. And some women had less freedom and fewer rights, and some had more. Pearlie says the Greeks believe that women were lesser than men. Good. Okay, so we've got that. The other thing maybe we could say about values and beliefs in terms of religion is that the Greek gods were seen as as powerful, but they really had human qualities, right? And so again, if you contrast this to sort of the Judeo-Christian version of God, so the Christian or the Jewish God or the sort of Muslim or if you think about Allah, all of those gods are kind of seen to be perfect, right? They're perfect beings, they're unquestionable, they are totally good, and they always, they are kind of all powerful. But the Greeks had a different version of their gods, right? Because their gods were very human in some ways, right? Sometimes they acted badly, sometimes they were childish, sometimes they were jealous, sometimes they cheated on their husbands or wives, sometimes they got angry and killed someone just because they were, upset or annoyed. So the Greek gods are kind of they're very emotional, right? They're very human in terms of how they behave, even though they are powerful beings as well. And again, that's different from a Judeo-Christian imagining of God, where God's kind of a perfect thing, right? Perfect being. Okay, and last one. Did we hear anything about cultural expressions? Jimmy, you had this earlier, so I'm going to put it up now. Greek music, right? So yeah, the Greeks were musicians, as I think, and I think that would be a cultural universal. I think basically all societies, all cultures have had some form of music throughout the centuries. I think music is an important part of what it means to be human, and I think we haven't really talked about it too much in this class because in the ancient world music was heard, and of course music doesn't preserve in the archaeological record, and so in many cases we don't have a lot of visibility in terms of what kind of music people were playing at the time. But I think it's fair to say that music was an important part of all cultures. Okay, so do we have any? I think we may have covered everything. Oh, no. Come on. Sculpture, right? We talked about Greek sculpture and plays. Yeah, so the Greeks had a very rich, dramatic tradition, right? They built theaters all throughout the Greek world where plays with kind of sort of tragic ends were performed, and the Greeks really got into these and they enjoyed them, and they sort of cried and got angry and sort of experienced all the emotions that the characters were experiencing as well. We saw some Greek sculpture, both in marble and in bronze, and we said that some of those bronzes might have been cast from real people, which is kind of cool. Music, of course, would have been part of it. And architecture as well. And actually, I have a few slides on art and architecture, which I might slide into Monday's class, just to talk about them really quickly. And you might be able to make a case for democracy and philosophy and democracy being expressions of the culture as well. So from this period of classical Greece and from Athens, we have a lot of things that have found their way into Western culture. So from drama and the arts to sculpture to architecture to politics to philosophy to science. There's a lot of things that come out of this really very short period that have found their way into Western culture and into the modern world. But that's kind of all the time we have for today, because we've got no time left. So thank you all for being here. Those of you who participated in the live chat, thank you. You did a good job. I hope you have a great weekend. Don't forget to work on your paper a little bit so you don't leave it till the last minute, because that would be bad. But I hope you have a nice weekend and get outside, and I will see you on Monday. Okay, so see you later, people. Take it easy. See you Monday. Bye.